Genesis 6, you said you were ready. Verse 1. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Language changes over time, doesn't it?
Yep.
If your spouse were to ask you, how do I look today? And you said, well, you look fair. You might find your toast burnt tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
When you read the word in Genesis, we're talking about words changing. When you read the word good in Genesis 1, Yahweh created, and it says that he saw what he had made, and he said it was good. In the Hebrew, that word is tob, and tob doesn't mean good. Tob means excellent. It means awesome. It's the best you can get, the best you can be, the Hebrew word tob. So it shouldn't have been translated good, because good to us doesn't actually mean the best, right? Well, when you see the word fair here in Genesis 6, it doesn't mean, well, that's fair. That's what we think of. It doesn't mean fair as we understand it. You ever looked that word up? Anybody? Got any idea what Hebrew word that is?
Good.
Tob. How about that? What does tob mean?
Very best.
Awesome. Marvelous. Beautiful. Excellent. So they saw that the daughters of men were wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sons of God looked at these women and said, agreed with Yahweh, they're very good, right? When you see the word fair here in Genesis 6, again, it doesn't mean fair. It means to be excellent. All right, look in verse 3. Yahweh said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. So in verse 2, we're told about sons of God taking for themselves wives from the daughters of men. And now we're told that there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. The Hebrew word that was translated as giants is the Hebrew word nephil, from which we get our word Nephilim. And so we'll talk more about that as we go. Verse 5. Elohim saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented Yahweh that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And Yahweh said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repents me that I made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh.
Amen.
Some people think that grace is a New Testament concept that only came to be after the resurrection of the Messiah. That also is absurd. Yahweh is an Elohim of mercy and grace, always was, always is, always will be. An Elohim of mercy and grace. Twice we're shown that to be true in these 8 verses we just read. Look at verse 3 again. Yahweh said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh. Yet. See that word yet? That's an amazing word. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Yahweh said, this has got out of control. I got to do something about it. Yet, I'm going to give him 120 years to fix it. He didn't execute judgment that very instant. He gave man 120 years to fix it. He gave him 120 years to repent. He didn't just give him 120 years to repent. He sent Methuselah. He sent Enoch. He sent Noah to preach to them, to warn them he's about to destroy the earth. He told them, it wasn't like, oh wow, where'd this rain come from? He told them for 120 years, I'm going to flood the earth. And you better fix this. If you'll repent, we don't have to do this for 120 years. Now, folks, that's mercy.
Yes, sir.
Right? And that's verse 3, talks about mercy. But then you look at verse 8, it says Noah found grace. The Hebrew word there is C-H-E-N, pronounced Cain. It means pleasantness or favor. When Yahweh looked upon Noah, He was pleased. Let that sink in. This word does not mean that Yahweh overlooked all of Noah's wickedness and disobedience and decided to show him favor anyway. That's some people's concept of grace, and the Bible calls that turning grace into lasciviousness. This word means that when Yahweh looked upon Noah, He was pleased with how Noah walked. He was pleased with how Noah lived. He favored him over everybody else because of the righteousness that was in Noah's life. Look in verse 9, you'll see it there. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with Elohim. Remember? What are we told about Enoch? He walked with Yahweh. Right? The same thing's being said about Noah. He also walked with Yahweh. The Bible says, can two walk together unless they agree? So if we're told that Noah walked with Yahweh, what are we being told? He agreed with Yahweh. He agreed with Yahweh about how he ought to live. He agreed with Yahweh about how he ought to worship. Right? So they walked together, and he was just. Look that word up. It means to be righteous or lawful. And that's what righteousness is lawfulness. So when it says in verse 8 that Noah found grace, it is saying that Noah was favored because he was a righteous man that was walking with Yahweh. May the same be said of us upon whom the end of days has come.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, this morning, as you can well see, there is a lot of things tucked into these 8 verses. Right. And it needs to be examined, it needs to be talked about, and it needs to be understood, and we're going to do that. Over the past few weeks, I began the most thorough examination of these verses that I've ever undertook in my life. And you will see as we go forward that when you're willing to examine them thoroughly and properly, they communicate a massive amount of information. If you want to just read over them and leave them be, then so be it. But if you're willing to thoroughly examine them, honestly examine them, properly examine them, they're full of a massive amount of information. And this massive amount of information can be extremely time-consuming and almost overwhelming. But as I looked at it and considered it in my mind and heart and wrestled with the best ways for you and I to consume it and to digest it, in the midst of trying to discern what we're to talk about and what we need to know and how to best deal with everything there is to know, 2 answers came to me. These were not answers to questions I was asking, but 2 answers came to me. They were answers to questions that I have been asked. And knowing that you have been or will also be asked the same question, what I'm going to do this morning, rather than unlocking all of the information that's found in Genesis 6 today, what I want to do is share with you those answers, because if they help me, they're going to help you too. You'll be blessed by knowing them. Question number 1 that got answered for me is a question that I'm asked often. Why do y'all spend so much time in the Old Testament? You ever been asked that? Mm-hmm. Have you? I get asked that often, or I've been asked that numerous times. Or sometimes it's not in the form of a question, sometimes it comes in the form of an accusation. Y'all focus too much on the Old Testament, right? And the follow-up is not enough on the Messiah. Well, when somebody asks me that question now, I have an answer. Yeah. I always had one, but I've got a very concise answer, or a couple of them. Answer number 1 is because of John chapter 5. That's why I spend so much time in the Old Testament. Let's go there. We looked at it a couple of weeks ago, but let's go there and look at that again. Why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament? Well, because of what's said in John chapter 5. That's why. I read the New Testament too. And it told me I ought to spend a lot of time in the Old Testament.
Yep.
Verse 42. But I know you, that you have not the love of Elohim in you. Now think about the people he's talking to. They're the religious leaders of the day. They look religious, they sound religious, they dress religious, they look dedicated, they look devoted, but they did not love Yahweh. That's what he said to them. I know this about you. You have not the love of Yahweh in you. They loved their religion. Yeah. They loved the system that they had set up that allowed them to worship any way they wanted to worship. Right? They loved that. But if they really loved Yahweh, they would have wanted to know what He said about how they're supposed to live. They would have wanted to know what He said about how they're supposed to worship. Right. But Yeshua said to them, I know this about you. You don't have the love of Yahweh in you. Not saying you're not religious, not saying that you're not devoted to the system you're involved in, but you don't have the love of Yahweh in you. Continue reading. I am come in my Father's name, and you receive me not. If another shall come in his own name, him you will receive. How can you believe which receive honor of one another, and seek not the honor that comes from Yahweh only? Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuses you. Who would that be? Moses. We know it because we're looking at it. But how many people could honestly answer that question? If you were to say to somebody, there's one that's going to accuse you before the Father, how many folks will say, I bet it's Moses. But that's what Messiah said to them. There's one that's going to accuse you before the Father, and it's going to be Moses, in whom you trust. Verse 46. For had you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not his writings, how will you believe my words? Focus on verse 46. Had you believed Moses, you would have believed me, and here's why. Tell me why.
For he wrote about me.
He wrote about me. Now, how many people think of the Pentateuch, Torah, in that way? How many people think of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy of being a book that's about the Messiah? But that's what Messiah said. Moses wrote about me. What did Moses write about? Well, he wrote about a bunch of dietary stuff we don't have to do, and the Sabbath, and a bunch of Levitical stuff. No. Messiah said, he wrote about me. And then he said this, Moses is going to accuse you on the day of judgment because you did not believe, or you do not believe, the things that he wrote. Now I want you to listen carefully to what he's going to say to these folks and see if it doesn't apply today. First he said, he's going to accuse you on the day of judgment because you do not believe what he wrote. Do you know that the vast majority of Bible believers, and I use that term in quotations because I don't say you can be a Bible believer if you don't believe the Bible. But there's a bunch of folks who go to church every Sunday and say they are Christian Bible believers. But you know that the majority of them no longer believe in a 6-day creation? You know the majority of them think that that's to be taken figurative and not literal? Do you know that the majority of them no longer believe in a real flood? They think it's figurative, that it's not supposed to be taken literally. A recent Gallup poll said that only 24% of those who identify themselves as Christians, only 24% believe that the Bible can be taken literally. 24%. Now go back and look at what Messiah said. He said Moses is going to accuse you. Well, why would Moses accuse them? Because they're no longer believing what he said. How long did Moses say it took to create the heavens and the earth? He said it took 6 days. Did Moses write about a flood?
He did.
He did. No wonder people no longer believe what Moses said about the Sabbath and images and feast days and dietary laws if they no longer believe that the Bible's literal. Messiah said Moses would make accusations on the day of judgment. And then he said this, had you believed Moses, you would have believed me. It is a fact that if you do not believe what Moses wrote, you do not believe the Messiah. That's a fact. It can't be argued. You can say, no, I believe what Messiah said. If you don't believe what Moses said, you don't. You're arguing with Messiah if you say that, because Messiah said, had you believed Moses, you would have believed me. Both taught that obedience to Yahweh's instruction is essential.
Right.
Those who don't believe Moses got that instruction straight from Yahweh. Those who do not believe that he got that instruction straight from Yahweh also do not believe the one who came straight from Yahweh and reinforced it. Right. The Messiah said, had you believed him, you would have believed me. Then listen to this. Then Messiah said, he wrote of me. Why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament? Because Moses was writing about my Messiah. That's why. Now look real quickly with me at Luke 24. I spend time in Torah, not trying to learn some new restriction. I spend time in Torah that I might know the true Messiah. I want to know everything about him that there is to know, and Moses wrote about him. Look at Luke 24. Messiah had been crucified. He had been buried. It was now 3 days since he had been buried. And we pick up reading this story in verse 13. And behold, two of them, that is his disciples, behold, two of them went that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 60 furlongs. And they walked together and they talked together of all these things which had happened. And it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Yeshua himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were holden that they should not know him. And he said unto them, what manner of communications are these that ye have one to another as you walk and are sad? What's made you boys so sad? And the one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answering said unto him, are you only a stranger in Jerusalem, and have not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? And he said unto them, what things? And they said unto him, concerning Yeshua of Nazareth, which was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before Elohim and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the 3rd day since these things were done. Yea, and certain women also of our company made us astonished, which were early at the sepulchre. And when they found not his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels, which said that he was alive. And certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre and found it even so as the women had said, but him they saw not. In other words, you want to know why we're sad? That's why. Then he said to them, O fools, slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Don't forget, Moses is a prophet. Ought not Mashiach to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? Y'all should have known this. It's clear that this is what was supposed to happen to him. And then he taught them a Bible lesson, verse 27. Beginning at Moses. Where did he begin? Whew. Beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Notice that he did not say, well, the first thing you men are going to have to do to understand this is to forget everything that you've ever read or been taught about Yahweh from the Old Testament. No, here's the first thing he did. He called them fools. That not set well with you? Made you nervous? Read it. What did he say? Oh, fools. You know what that means? Unintelligent. Look the word up. It's really two words, a prefix and a suffix put together. And it refers to somebody, listen to me now, unwilling to exercise their mind. An unwillingness that has become an inability to actually do any thinking. Whew, let that sink in. It's frustrating when you're talking to these kind of people who have an unwillingness that has become an inability to actually do any thinking. They believe what they believe and they don't want you messing with what they believe. They think what they think and they don't want you talking to them about anything that contradicts what they think or what they believe. Their minds are made up. Don't confuse them with facts and don't confuse them with truth. That's a fool.
Yeah.
That's somebody who is unwilling to do any thinking and to exercise the mind. Then what did he do after he called him a fool? He began at Moses to show them who he was. If the Messiah you serve is not the Messiah revealed in Torah, you're serving a false Messiah.
Amen.
You serve is not the Messiah who was obedient in every way to Torah, you're serving the false Messiah. If the Messiah you serve does not require you to keep Torah, you're serving a false Messiah. Why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament? Because Moses wrote about my Messiah, that's why. If I don't believe what Moses wrote, then I would never know who the true Messiah is, and I'd never believe anything he said. That's why I spend so much time in the Old Testament. Through Moses, I learned that the true Messiah is my Sabbath of rest. Through Moses, I learned that my Messiah is the Passover lamb that takes away the sins of the world. Through Messiah, I learned that he is the unleavened bread and the first fruits of them that sleep. Through Messiah, I learned that he is the one who sent back the gift of the Holy Spirit, who is to live in me and dwell in me and strengthen me to walk in obedience to Torah and to guide me into all truth. Through Moses, I learned that he is coming again, and that's reason for me to let out a teruah of shout. Through Moses, I learned that he is my substitute who takes upon himself my guilt on the Day of Atonement. Through Moses, I learned that the Messiah is the one who made me able to tabernacle with Yahweh. That's the reason I spend so much time in the Old Testament. Because of Moses, I can see, I can know, and I can serve the true Messiah. Amen. So the question really becomes, to anybody that would ask, why y'all spend so much time in the Old Testament? The question really becomes, why don't you?
Yeah.
Right? If Moses was writing a Messiah, why would you not want to meditate therein day and night?
Right.
If Messiah warned that those who do not believe Moses would not believe him, why would you dare allow Satan and his servants to get you to doubt anything that Moses ever said? Because if you doubt in what he said, you will also doubt the things that Messiah said.
That's right.
So those are the real questions. The Gospels are great. They're awesome. They reveal what Messiah did. But Torah, oh my. Torah reveals who he is.
Right.
And without Torah, you'll never identify the true Messiah. Without Torah, men begin to believe in a Messiah who teaches people they don't have to obey Yahweh.
Yeah.
Now that is not an overstatement, that's the truth. Without Torah, men begin to believe in a Messiah who teaches people that they don't have to obey Yahweh. And that's insane. But that's what fools believe.
Yeah.
Why do I spend so much time in Torah? Because of John 5. And the second reason I spend so much time in Torah is because we're told to.
Yeah.
Turn to Deuteronomy 6. Before we read it, keep this in mind. Keep in mind what Messiah said. Messiah said, Moses wrote of me. If Moses wrote of him, then we should read Torah. So listen to what Torah says about reading Torah. Deuteronomy 6 verse 1. Now these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments which Yahweh your Elohim commanded to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you go to possess it, that you might fear Yahweh your Elohim, to keep all His statutes and His commandments which I command you, you and your son and your son's sons, all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. Pardon me. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may increase mightily, as Yahweh Elohim of your fathers has promised you, in the land that flows with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our Elohim is one Yahweh. You shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That's not just a New Testament concept. It came out of Deuteronomy 6. And these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently unto your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them upon the post of your house and on your gates. These words, now listen, Messiah said He wrote of me, which means you ought to go read Torah, right? When you read Torah, Torah said these words that are in Torah shall be in your heart. If you do not believe that you should have Torah in your heart, then you do not believe what Messiah said. You shall teach them diligently to your children. If you do not believe that you should teach Torah to your children, then you do not believe what Messiah said. You shall talk of them when you sit, walk, lie down, and rise up. If you do not believe that you should be rehearsing these words over and over and over again, then you do not believe what Messiah said. You shall bind them upon your hands and eyes and house. If you do not believe that you should allow everything that is written in Torah to determine how you live, to determine how you think, and to determine how you work, then you do not believe what Messiah said. Messiah said He's writing about me. You ought to read it because it reveals me. When you go to read it, it says, write them down, put them in your heart, think on them, talk about them day and night, bind them to everything you do. If you don't believe you ought to do that, then you don't believe the Messiah. Why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament? Let me tell you why. Because Moses and the prophets wrote of Messiah. That's why. See John 5, see Luke 24. Commit those two passages to memory. Next time you're talking to somebody that accuses you of spending too much time or accuses us of spending too much time in the Old Testament, you take them to John 5, you remind them of Luke 24. They make it clear that these things are written about the Messiah. We're not going there trying to get in bondage, which is ridiculous to even think. We're going there that we might know who the true Messiah is. Right? And when they say, why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament? Say, because the Messiah told me in order to believe in Him, I had to believe Moses. And Moses said that I should read, think, and meditate on Torah all the time. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night. Then shall you make your way prosperous. Then shall you have good success. That's the reason that I spend so much time in Torah. That being so, who then would you be worshiping if you're being taught to not read Torah? If you're standing in a congregation, sitting in a congregation, and you're being taught, stay out of the Old Testament. Don't be reading the Torah. You don't have to do what it says. Who are you worshiping? Because it's not the true Messiah, because the true Messiah said, He wrote about me.
Yes. Amen.
Now, only a demon,
Right.
Only a demon would try to keep you from reading something about who the true Messiah is.
Amen.
It's true.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Well, that's the answer to question number 1. Question number 2 is this. If you haven't been asked it yet, you will be. Why do y'all bother reading the Apocrypha? The implication being that if it was important, it would be in our Bibles. Well, let me say this before I give the answer. It, or at least most of it, was included in the Holy Writings until around the time of Constantine.
Yeah.
There were some ulterior motives involved that took it out. There were 80 books included in what's called the Holy Writings at first. And then some of them got taken out, and then they got classified as Apocrypha. Right? But that's not my answer. My answer, when somebody says, why do you even bother reading the Apocrypha? My answer isn't, well, because it used to be in the Holy Writings. That's not my answer. Might have been until this week, but it's not my answer anymore. Let me show you my answer, the answer that was given or the answer that was shown to me. Go back to Genesis chapter 6. We're going to read a portion of that. And I want you to let the answer dawn upon you. Genesis 6 verse 1, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, took them wives of all which they chose. Give me just a second. There we go. They took them wives of all which they chose. And Yahweh said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. As I began to study this, in all honesty, I was frustrated that Genesis 6 did not give me more information. I was frustrated that it didn't say more about these sons of God and identify them for me and tell me who they are. One sentence, that's all. It just says the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Why didn't it say who they were? Why didn't it say where they came from? Why didn't it say exactly what they did and how they did it? And why didn't Genesis 6 explain to me what it meant by Nephil or Nephilim or giants? It just throws it out there. What is a Nephil? What is a Nephilim? And what did it mean when it says that these were mighty men, men of renown? There were so many unanswered questions in Genesis 6, and it confused me and frustrated me because I wanted it to tell me more, and it didn't tell me more. And no matter how hard I looked at it, it didn't tell me more. I was very frustrated until Yahweh gave me the answers to 2 questions. Why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament, and why do you bother to read the Apocrypha? When I saw the answers to those 2 questions, then I knew why Genesis 6 doesn't tell me more than what it already does. You see it yet? It does not tell me more for 2 reasons. Number 1, Moses had one assignment from Yahweh. And what was his assignment?
Write down about Yeshua.
I want you to write about the Messiah. We may look at it and think he wrote about a lot of stuff. Messiah said he wrote about me. Everything in it is pointing to the Messiah so you can identify him, so that you know the lineage from which he came, so that you know what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. Pictures and images and words that reveal the true Messiah. That was Moses' assignment. When Moses wrote, he wrote about him. That was his focus. He did not get distracted by saying a whole lot about where did Cain get his wife. Moses is not trying to help you understand where Cain got his wife.
Right.
Moses wants you to be able to identify the Messiah when he arrives. Right? He didn't spend any time talking about who the sons of God were. He didn't spend any time identifying what Nephilim are. He didn't spend any time talking about how big they actually got. He didn't spend any time talking about how they existed before the flood and after the flood. He doesn't spend any time talking about Nimrod and who Nimrod really is. He mentions him and then just goes on. Those things were not Moses' focus. His focus was Messiah. That's why he'll give you genealogies and bloodlines. He's talking about the one who will come from man and redeem man. And he wants you to know how Yahweh put it all together.
Yeah.
That's why I read Torah. But that's also why I read the Apocrypha.
Yeah.
Do you see it yet? Yahweh had Moses mention all of those things. The sons of God, the daughters of men, the Nephilim giants, the mighty men, Nimrod. Yahweh had Moses mention all those things because Yahweh would have others write about those things, and He expected us to read it and be familiar with what those other authors wrote about. When Moses wrote Genesis 6, when it was read to the people of Moses' day, when he read Genesis 6 to them, when the Levites read Genesis 6 to them, they didn't say, hey, whoa, time out. What do you mean the sons of God came into the daughters of men? They knew what he was talking about. Right. They had the writings of Enoch. They had read the writings of Enoch. The writings of Enoch had been read to them. They understood what Genesis 6 was talking about because they were familiar with the writings of Enoch. Right. Are you with me? They knew what he said. If I were to say to you, Bill, I need you to come to my house tomorrow. I need the starter put on the old Massey. It's going to need some gas in it. Put the box blade on it. I need you to dress my driveway. What have I just assumed?
That I know how to do all that.
Do what now?
That I know how to do all that.
Not only that you know how to do all that, but I assume you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what a Massey is. There are people who wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about when I say, I need you to put the starter on the Massey.
Right.
The what on the what?
Yeah.
But what am I talking about? Tractor. I need you to put gas in it. What am I assuming you know?
The diesel.
That thing's powered by a combustible engine that runs on gasoline. Right?
Right.
Put a box blade on it. A box what? I'm assuming that you know what this farm implement is, how to hook it up, and what it will do when I say to you, dress my driveway.
Right.
I'm not asking you to put clothes on it.
Right.
Right? I'm assuming a lot because I'm expecting you to know.
Right.
When Yahweh just barely mentioned something in Genesis 6, He barely mentioned it, not because it's unimportant. He wouldn't have mentioned it at all if it was unimportant.
Right.
He barely mentioned it because he expected us to know that information from other writings. But Moses' focus is not writing about the Nephilim. Moses' focus is to reveal the Messiah to us. Right. If we want to know who the Nephilim were and the sons of God were, go read Enoch. He'll make it plain to you.
Amen.
Why do you spend so much time in the Old Testament? Because Messiah expects me to. He said you need to know what he said and believe what he said so that you can know who I am. He wrote about me. And if you'll believe him, you'll believe me. Why do you bother with the Apocrypha? Because it's evident to me from Genesis chapter 6, Yahweh expects me to.
Yeah.
He didn't mention it just to fill in pages.
Right.
He mentioned it because he thinks and expects that I'll get that information from somebody else who had a different focus. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
It helped me. It set me free to understand why this Ruach HaKodesh draws me to Torah. And it set me free to understand why I do need to read and study Apocrypha. Right. Stand to your feet. Know this. Yahweh expects us to know what's in there.
Amen.
Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. As his name is put upon you, so shall he bless you. Hallelujah.
Amen.